Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Public Works Committee will come to order. As usual, we have a general agenda and a consent agenda. Before we go to the general agenda, let me ask if there are any items from consent agenda that any member or other council member would like to have reviewed for discussion. I'd like to pull C2. I have some questions about that. Anything else? Yeah.
Move approval of balance.
Second.
All right. Is there discussion? If not, those in favor of approving items C1 and C3 through 5, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. That's approved. Thank you. And we'll go to G2.
Resolution adopting a modification to the sidewalk.
C2. C2.
Okay. Resolution adopting a modification to the sidewalk ranking criteria form.
Thank you very much. Ms. Turner, would you like to summarize? And then I've got a specific suggestion.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. As the committee may recall, a couple of months ago you looked at the existing sidewalk ranking criteria and directed that staff should go back and add some additional considerations and also adjust the scoring so that instead of 85 points being the max, I think 100 points were the max. Those two things have been done, and so we're bringing it back to you now for official approval as opposed to information.
My specific suggestion, if you look at the new form, which I think is much neater and easier to read, among other things, you've added 10 points for curb and gutter. In my experience, in my district, a lot of the sidewalks that I think are most needed for safety purposes are along sections without curb and gutter. I personally think that's too many points to give for that. I would recommend taking 5 points from that and redistributing it to the pedestrian generators, one each. That would keep it at 100 points. Put a little more weight on the pedestrian generators and less weight on the cost factor of the curb and gutter. Would still be, evaluating all the projects based on how much money we had and where we thought it would be best used. But in the ranking itself, you wouldn't have that heavy thumb on the scale.
Be fine with staff.
Would there be objections to that from committee members?
Can you point out again on the form where we're?
Okay. If you look in C2, page 27.
27, okay.
Okay. You've got
Curb and gutter 10, and then what are you suggesting to go?
I'm suggesting you drop that to 5, and you take those 5 points and you redistribute them one each on the right side, pedestrian generators, so that instead of max 4 for those, you go max 5 for each of those.
Gotcha.
Mr. McGimmon.
Just from a staff, why was it rated at the 10? Is that a financial implication?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That was my question exactly.
Yeah.
No. Next question.
Mr. Clark.
One of the challenges with no curb and gutter, sometimes, and we actually have one on the list in the West report on the bond referendum that doesn't have it, but it does. But having driven the road, it looks like it'll work okay. Some of them have a ditch where the water runs into that, takes the place of the curb and gutter. And if the sidewalk had to be on the other side of that, then sometimes you're out of the right of way. So how do we adjust for that?
In other factors, basically.
Okay. Because that drives the price way up if you have to go by land or something.
We do evaluate whether it's cheaper to buy the additional right-of-way and easements and put it behind the ditch, or whether it's cheaper to replace the ditch with curb and gutter.
Okay, thank you. And as the projects come forward, they're all still going to have the length and the cost. And I think it's appropriate, as we do now, to note whether there's curb and gutter in an area, so that helps explain when there's a higher cost, what's a factor. And we can take that into account. And certainly there are going to be circumstances where you've got a good argument that doing twice as much length is going to be more valuable than doing half the length in a location that's without curb and gutter. But there are other instances where it's the value, the safety improvement value is going to flip the other way. Even though you're not getting as much length, you're getting more safety bang for the buck. And my thought was that 10% of your total score for that factor, was too much thumb on the scale there for that.
I'll make a motion for that effect, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay. Moved and seconded that we approve with that one adjustment. Further discussion? If not, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? All right. We're ready to roll. Thank you very much. That concludes the consent items, and we are ready now for item G1, please.
Information regarding on-street parking policy.
Mr. Turner, you're still up, I believe.
Sure. Recently, the staff has received concerns from citizens regarding our on-street parking program. We've provided some information about what we currently do and are seeking direction from the committee as to whether we should bring a revised policy or consider a revised staff policy on that. The current policy allows for residents of a property to indicate and therefore direct what parking restrictions within reason that are allowed within, in front of their property on the public streets. Staff and the city still has an override if there are public safety concerns that would mean that parking needed to be removed in order to accommodate emergency vehicles, for instance. But by and large, we try to work with the individual property owner on accommodating their parking restriction request. The complaints that we've gotten are about the fact that others in the neighborhood don't feel that that one individual represents the general consensus of the community. So one option that we're bringing forward to you is to revise the policy to allow for well, we didn't actually bring it together, but we are considering an option that would allow for a consensus opinion rather than one individual to make that decision. So we're seeking direction as to whether the committee wants us to pursue that.
Mr. McGovern.
This is something that, in my opinion, I think is necessary. I've had individuals, as you know, Mr. Turner, in the East Ward who have been affected by this policy, particularly similar to, I see what this note we have from individuals in the cul-de-sac, where one day they wake up and there's a sign out that says no parking, and there was no requirement that the neighbors were notified of the process of knowing anything about that took place. So I think it's important that whatever we do, that we bring back something that requires some type of interaction with other neighbors within the area, especially when you see areas such as in cul-de-sacs and that place where it's almost going to happen, where you're going to be impacted by what takes place with the parking in front of within that entire area there. Now, the only question I have is, I'm not sure what's the 26 feet. Is that the average road size? Is that
26 is the city's standard for a new street. So any streets were built according to our current standard are built to 26 feet, unless they were built as collector streets, in which case that's 36 feet, as I recall. We do have in here, I correct myself, we do have in here a revised policy language that would call for 70% of the adjacent property owners to be in support before a parking change was made for an individual.
And so, if I may, on the areas in terms of 26 feet, what if they weren't looking for a parking prohibition, but would this impact permitted parking in that area?
No, permit parking is established by the city, and so we have certain we have certain directives from the council as to when permit parking is allowed.
Okay.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turner, I like the idea of the decision-making coming from the community. So I definitely like the part where we're looking at 70% of the adjacent property owners in order to approve a particular petition. I would just ask, I believe that this item might stay in committee for discussion. This is just for informational purposes. I would just ask if we can get some examples, maybe one in every ward, of a street that is at least has a road width of 26 feet, so that we can have something to measure against. Or if we're approached by constituents or citizens who may have concerns, we want to be able to articulate it the best we can.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Mr. McIntosh.
In the permit parking scenario, I believe it's 70% of property owners of 3 contiguous blocks, is that not?
I believe it's 3, yes.
Okay, so here we're just talking about just adjacent,
That's
not
correct.
a greater distance than that, just a,
That's correct. There's a greater requirement for establishing a permit parking zone so that you don't have spots of permit parking.
right, okay, all right, thanks.
I have a question. 70% of adjacent property owners, there's no specified distance, or, you know, how long are you?
Typically talking about that block.
I think that for clarity's sake, we should specify in the policy what we're talking about.
Certainly.
And is the concept that you would either permit or forbid no parking areas of less than a block's length?
The concept is that it would be for the entire block, for that side of the street. So for instance, if everyone on one side of the street got together and 70% of them said that they wanted a parking restriction, that would be acceptable. It would not be required that the other side of the street have the same agreement.
Would you anticipate that the city agencies would continue to have the ability to request a no parking area of less than a block's length?
Absolutely. If, for instance, as I said earlier, there's a public safety need to restrict it, or if there's a sight distance issue at a driveway or at a intersection, then we would have the ability to prohibit parking in order to maintain those sight distances.
Those are the instances that I'm more familiar with. In the cases that I can think of, what has happened is that a citizen has come forward saying, there is a safety issue here. It's in front of my house, or it's part of it in front of my house, but here is the safety issue. And DOT's gone out and looked at it and concluded, yeah, there is a safety issue. And they've said, okay, no parking here, and it's been 40 or 50 or whatever feet. More often than the other instances of, I just don't want people parking.
We do regularly have calls from council members indicating they have a constituent who has a sight distance problem that we need to address in what turns out to be a parking restriction.
So, is there consensus that with those, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Taylor, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Clark, I apologize. I apologize.
I like the idea that you would do the whole block. It would not make sense to have a house with parking and whatever. I am concerned, particularly if this is residential, on the other side of the street, okay, we're going to get together on our side and vote not to have parking. And so when people come see me, they all park in my across the street neighbor's yard, mess up the grass, whatever. So if it is, and whoever's first gets there, because what do we do if both sides vote? Then suddenly there's no parking at all.
We can look at it for the entire
I
both
think
sides
it probably
block,
needs
if
to
you
be,
like.
since it does affect, to me, the people that are affected should decide. And I think, particularly in a residential, it needs to be both sides for that block.
What do you think, Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we have to put some definition on who gets some input. I think we need to clearly define the word adjacent. And one last matter to work out, that was in reference to Councilmember Clark's point. One last matter we probably need to work out is what city agency goes out and garners support for the 70% petition. Would it be the community assistance liaisons? Would it be the Department of Transportation? Would there be a neighborhood or community meeting that would be called by the council members? We need to figure out who would be responsible for getting 70%. I'm sure you've worked that out. So what say you, Mr. Turner?
Any of the above are fine. All we need is to know what the consensus of the neighborhood is. All of those methods, I believe, have been used in the past to give us feedback on things.
Okay.
So transportation has been the most prominent in terms of getting feedback from citizens on what they want. But
So-
any of those venues would be fine.
So this would fall in the lap of the local Department of Transportation.
Correct.
Mr. Montgomery?
Any changes to this policy, how does this affect current areas that are currently under the policy as it stands today?
If there's objection to something that's in place under the current policy, then we would take it out if the new policy is adopted.
Oh, I'm saying in terms of a neighborhood that, let's say you have a road where, so that's what you're saying?
If the neighbors are comfortable with the no parking restrictions that are there now, then the new policy wouldn't affect it. But if there is opposition from a resident who feels that the new policy should be in effect, we would go and impose the new policy.
Okay, I got you.
In other words, we're not going to go looking for situations where people are satisfied with the current conditions, but if they aren't satisfied, then we would bring it under the new policy.
The city attorney was listening carefully. Okay, just want to be sure we're not. Okay, all right, fine.
All right.
That's important to me in terms of how that impacts.
Other questions or suggestions? If not, is there a consensus that with the changes requested, it come back next month as an action item?
Yes.
Yeah, whenever, yeah.
All right, very good. We'll do that. Let's go to item 2, please. G2.
Report on Business 40 improvements.
Thanks very much. And leading the way here, Ms. McCullough. And if you'll introduce yourself and your colleague.
Good afternoon, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for having us. I have with me Michael Penny. He's with NCDOT. Michael Penny is here to talk about the Business 40 Improvement Project. The Business 40 Improvement Project is scheduled to have some public hearings upcoming, and he will talk about the project and answer any questions that council members have today.
Very good. Mr. Penny, welcome, and please give us your information.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you having me tonight. You have hopefully before you a packet of some information. And I'm going to, if you'll take off the first stapled sheet, behind that is a copy of the newsletter that has gone out. We have approximately 27,000 people, I think, on our mailing list for the newsletter, so quite a large interest. It's one of our shorter newsletter. The main point is on the inside. It covers where the hearings will be next week. And we have a hearing on Tuesday at Milton Road Center, and it will have an open house from 4 to 6:30, and then the formal hearing will start at 7. And then on Thursday at the Miller Park Rec Center, and that will start at 5 and go till 7 for the open house. And the presentation, the formal presentation of the hearing will start at 7:30. And what we're looking for at the public hearing is to gain input from the public as to the 2 alternatives that have been presented. Essentially, the 2 alternatives are Alternative 3, which is the Liberty Main alternative, which would be the primary access into downtown, and that would facilitate the closing of Cherry and Marshall interchanges, leave a partial interchange at Broad Street, a full interchange, though increased in size, at Peters Creek Parkway, and replacing of 10 bridges and improving the vertical clearance under the West 4th Street Bridge. We'll lower the pavement there to ensure better vertical clearance. And the bridges would include replacement of the Church Street Bridge, the Main Street Bridge. The corridor will actually be depressed to allow for Liberty to be reversed, flipped. Currently, Liberty goes under Business 40. Liberty will go over Business 40. Business 40 will go under Liberty. It'll be very similar to the elevation at Main Street, if that will help you understand that. Depending on the alternative, Cherry and Marshall bridges will be replaced. Spruce Street is replaced under the Liberty Main alternative, but it is not replaced under the next alternative, which is the Cherry Marshall. Brookstown Bridge is replaced, going over Business 40, going over that. Broad Street is replaced. Green Street is replaced with a pedestrian bridge, which duals also as a function to carry the utilities that are currently being carried there across Business 40. As I said, Peters Creek Parkway is replaced as well.
Let me ask,
Yes.
under the Liberty Main alternative, the Spruce Street Bridge remains.
Correct.
You got a new bridge there.
Yes, sir.
Under the Cherry Marshall alternative, the Bruce Street Bridge comes out and is not replaced, so you don't.
Correct. Because, as you know, recently there was a pretty severe accident there with one car coming across, the other not paying attention, and there was a T-bone situation, and the car that was hit almost went into over the guardrail and into the oncoming traffic there on Business 40. So It is not one of our standard designs. Back in the 50s, it was acceptable. Of course, everything was a lot different in the 50s. Traffic patterns were different. People drove slower. They weren't as interested in getting to point A and B as quick as they are today. So with that, it is not the safest situation the way the ramp is currently set up with the stop condition for Spruce.
Is that the conclusion of your opening question?
That's just the alternatives, and as I said, the workshops are the hearing is a formal hearing. We'll actually have people sign up to speak when it comes time for each hearing. The same presentation will be made at both hearings to afford the public. They can come to either one and won't miss anything that's being presented. Their questions will be actually recorded and put down in a formal proceeding, minutes of the meeting, and we'll address those comments when we get further on in the DOT process. Prior to each of those formal hearings, there's an open house where it's a workshop stations where they can come in and see the hearing maps. They can see the visualization. They'll be able to look at some of the locations where we'll be doing temporary improvements during the detouring of traffic for construction. They'll also see we have 2 intersections that are off-site of the project that will require improvement, and that's Peters Creek Parkway at Academy will have some improvements, and then also at MLK between Marshall and Trade. There will be improvements. Currently, that's where MLK goes from a 4-lane section down to a 2-lane section, and because of the change of traffic patterns, it needs to have more laneage in there. We'll also have the environmental document there in case someone would like to peruse it. We'll be able to make copies of portions of the hearing maps for people to take home with them to see how the project affects their particular property. We will have renderings of our visualization there. We'll have our noise folks. We do have several noise-sensitive study areas. Noise walls are most probable on the project because of the change of the interchange configurations requires that. We also will have transit there. PART has come up with some park and ride options for people to utilize those services during construction to minimize trying to drive in during reroute of traffic. And we'll have comment table. With that, I would like to show you some visualizations that we will have. The first one is shows, if you look at your monitors, it's an overall view of the project. We start just beyond the Crafton Bridge with the lowering of the pavement and go under 4th Street. You can see the walls, potentially, the noise walls shown in there. There's one right here. There's also one being proposed here at Peters Creek Parkway. We'll have to work with our structures folks to verify that that can actually occur. You see the new Peters Creek Parkway interchange. It's a larger loop here and a new ramp. Coming up, you have the pedestrian bridge for Green Street. You do have a noise wall right here on this section of the project. We have shifted the pedestrian way bridge over to match the sidewalk on the east side of Green Street. We are now moving to the Broad Street interchange. We take the loops out and change the ramps to a more current standard of ramps, and we do match better to the new street pattern south of this interchange that the city recently did as a project. So you'll have a 3-lane section on that bridge and sidewalks. The Brookstown Bridge will be reduced in size and retaining walls put in on both sides to reduce the size of that structure. From Spruce Street all the way up to or close to the East Salem Avenue Bridge. We'll be looking at lowering the corridor up to 20 foot in some places to improve the vertical clearances on the structures. And this is the Liberty Main, and you can see that Spruce Street remains here. There's also the replacement of the Cherry and Marshall Street bridges. We're proposing bridging over the Strollway. Even with the lowering of the Business 40 itself, we'll still be bridging over the Strollway. This shows you the new on-ramp going westbound from Liberty, the new off-ramp to Liberty, which will carry over to Main. And you can see that elevation-wise, that the new Liberty Street crossing is very similar to the Main Street crossing. The Main Street ramps will essentially work as they are today. Church Street Bridge will be narrowed to help with the improving the vertical clearance on the ramps. You have a fairly wide bridge that only carries 2 lanes of traffic. And this is also a visualization of the second alternative, the Cherry Marshall alternative. We start on the same end of the project, just east of Crafton, with lowering the pavement to improve the 4th Street vertical clearance. Again, you can see the noise walls that are being represented. There's also noise walls here, and they will wrap around. There is also a noise wall at this point in time that runs around. This is, again, the new interchange, and it is the same interchange as the previous alternative. Again, Green Street is replaced under this alternative with a pedestrian bridge as well. Again, please keep in mind the bridge serves a dual function to facilitate individuals over to the ball field and other amenities that will be built in that area, and also to carry utilities that are currently carried by the Green Street Bridge. Under this alternative, there are no ramps or loops on Broad Street. Broad Street just crosses over as it currently does, but you will not be able to access Business 40 to Broad or vice versa. Again, Brookstown Avenue is replaced with a narrower structure, and retaining wall is used to close in that area underneath. We do have the ramp here for, again, we're lowering the whole project. We do have the, lowering of the corridor to allow for Liberty to go up and over. And as soon as it catches up with me, the presentation, you'll be able to see the interchange for Marshall and Cherry Street. You can see that we're keeping a portion here of High Street to allow for access into the, we have a bed and breakfast over here, and we also have the hotel facility that needs access. So High Street will remain one way, but the ramp has changed, the alignment's changed so that the two movements can come together and then make their movement prior to Marshall Street. Cherry Street ramps are streamlined, more in a current layout. Again, we bridge over the Strollway. These are not box culverts, these are actual bridges, so they are fairly wide. There is no ramp for Liberty in either direction. Main Street is narrowed to 2 lanes because the ramp comes up and forms the 3rd lane as a free flow. Right now it's a stop condition. The ramp configuration is very similar to what is there today. And Church Street, under this alternative, again, is narrowed to help improve the vertical clearance. Is there any particular question on the alternatives?
Now, under that last that you showed us was the Cherry Marshall alternative.
Yes, sir.
And there continue to be a westbound off-ramp and an eastbound on-ramp at, was that Liberty?
Main Street.
Main Street.
Main Street will
Main.
stay exactly, pretty much what it is today. But the vertical clearance will be improved under Church Street Bridge.
All right, other questions? Mr. Montgomery and Mr. Clark.
One thing I know I've heard from individuals in reference to at Liberty and the strollway, and how that will impact the strollway area, and really the fact that it then becomes difficult or not as enticing for individuals because of how it will go under in terms of safety questions for individuals and use of that. So I think that's something to be thought about.
We will be lighting those structures underneath, so when you walk under, if you walk along the strollway and you're under a bridge there, it'll all be lit under there. Similar to when we did the improvements on US 52 at 25th Street, we lit the underneath of the structure there because of the amount of pedestrians that use that area and that facility for walking, and lighting was a concern. We added lighting in that area. It would be the same concept, that one, and the strollway is the only one that will have lighting at this point in time. But that would be if the Brookstown one needed lighting as well, we could discuss that.
And with the sound barriers that will be there, aesthetically in terms of with those being built, would there be any additional aesthetics to kind of soften that?
There can be. We do have different designs. We have our standard, we have our slightly above our standard that we are now offering. But then we can go to other options. Those would be anything above the standard cost that we have on a per square footage basis. If the city desired those and paid the difference, like with any betterment, we can accommodate those.
Mr. Clark?
First off, this is a very important decision for the city. This road, once it's in, will not change for 50, 60 years, picking over, pretty far out. So I do think at the appropriate time, we need to have a committee to hold a meeting or something and go over it. I'm not worried about tonight, but at some point to go over all this again, I would personally need some maps to take home and study, because this is a very, very important decision. Questions I would have, and I don't need you to answer tonight, but questions I would have, I do think the public hearings are nice, but I'm always a bit cautious because oftentimes a squeaky wheel shows up, and it's not a random sampling of people's opinion, it's of the folks that probably are impacted by it. Questions, and I would think through it further as the meeting approaches, but specifically if there are traffic flow changes that we need to know about, that under this scenario there's X amount of traffic on these streets versus that, how that impacts the ballpark, how that would impact people coming and going versus kind of now, things of that sort. I'm kind of looking for more analytical analysis of, well, if you go on Cherry Street, it dumps X amount of traffic on these roads. If you go this one scenario, it's X amount of traffic on the other roads, and to kind of get a feel for how all that comes together.
In the latter chapters of the environmental assessment, I believe all the council members received one. If you didn't, if we did not get you one, we will get you one.
Well,
it's in there. It's got a table. The table is highlighted degradation. Any change in traffic volumes from the two alternatives is shown. If it's an improvement, a betterment of traffic flow, in other words, traffic has decreased, that would be a betterment, is shown in green. Any degradation where there's additional traffic is highlighted in yellow, and if it stays the same, it's white. So it's sort of color-coded, and there's a key there. But it is about 2 or 3 pages of table information, so it is lengthy. So make sure you've had a little bit of caffeine to read that.
And lastly, is the North Carolina DOT going to take a position?
We will, once we hold the hearings, there's a 30-day comment period, though people can provide their comments at the hearing. They have to up to 30 days after the hearing where we will close comment period, both on the environmental document and the hearing. And we will then take all those comments that we receive, and at our post-hearing meeting, we will go over the comments that we received at the hearing and all the written comments or emails that we have received, or even if someone has called in and talked to one of the staff about the project, we'll jot down their concern, and we will provide a response to those concerns. We will weigh all that information. Hopefully at that point in time, City Council will weigh in and state a preference of an alternative. We will take that in consideration with the public's information and also other information we receive. The Chamber of Commerce has provided, along with partnership with the Downtown Business Association, Business Alliance, information as to economic issues, et cetera. We will take all that in consideration and make a decision on an alternative sometime in October to November time period.
Mr. Kerr?
Mr. Chairman, I guess at this point I should explain that the game plan for this with the City Council is briefing you this month, then next month we'll come back with a staff recommendation, and then in September we'll ask the Council to make a decision on a City of Winston-Salem preference for which alternative the city as a whole prefers. So we wanted to give you time via that process, but you'll see on this outline that there is a September decision by the council expected to NCDOT. It's the typed sheet.
Yeah.
So it looks like an agenda.
So are you anticipating this coming to Public Works discussion both in August and September?
Yes.
Okay. So you'll have a report. Will you be reporting your recommendation to us
It'll be
in
the
August?
staff recommendation in August. And then any information or direction that you give us then, and then we'll come back through the committee process on to the full council, hopefully, in September.
All right. So the timeline, Mr. Clark and others then would be, we'll hear from you in August. We'll chew that over. We'll ask for any further information. Then you'll come back to us in the committee in September. We'll make a recommendation to the council, and the council will make a decision in September regarding what to recommend to DOT.
Yes.
And so we would particularly want to invite our other council colleagues who wish to do so to sit in at our September Public Works meeting. And of course, the August
if they
as
like.
well. But if they want to get in on what the committee recommends to the council before we get to the full council for that, and they need to come in September. All right, Mr. Taylor, then Mr. McIntosh.
Mr. Penny, let me first off say I appreciate your presentation. I especially like the way you used technology to give us a visual of some of the proposed adjustments on Business 40. With that being said, the next time this comes to us, whether it be the committee of the whole or all the council members at the table, if we could maybe see some of the proposed traffic volume increases and decreases as they get on and off the ramps, I think that'll be helpful. I know that you provided that information for us, and I don't even know if you can do that visually, but it would be very helpful if you could. Earlier in your presentation, before you got started, you mentioned some park and ride options during construction. Could you please tell me where those park and ride options would exist?
I do not have the map with me. I apologize for not having that. I believe there is approximately, I'm speaking off the top of my head on the visualization that will be presented, but there will be a map at the hearing showing those. I want to say it's between 15 and 20 additional park and ride facilities that they are looking at to boost the ability to bring people into the downtown area.
We'll send it out to
And those are scattered all around the peripheral of the city. So there's some on the north side, east side, south, and west sides.
And Mr. Turner had just given me the nod. I guess after all of the public hearings, the information will be given to us.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. McIntosh.
I got a bunch of questions. I'm probably only going to ask a few of them tonight. But I want to start out saying thank you. NCDOT, I think, got way outside their comfort zone on this project. And I know I saw the orange shirts walking around downtown neighborhoods, impacted neighborhoods years ago. And so I really appreciate the thoroughness that's gone into this and the outreach to the community to be involved. And there's been lots of opportunities to go to lots of meetings. I'm glad the timeline now to me is much more in focus. I know that's been sort of kind of an amorphous thing, but I'm glad that that's wrapping up. Couple of just quick bullet points that I'm concerned about. Back to the strollway discussion. I got real concerns that that's going to be too steep to stroll. That drop from First Street to its current level now is probably a good 30 feet, and then we're going to drop the highway 20 feet additional. We need to be real careful to make sure that that is still usable as a strollway.
It is. It does. Our roadway design folks have verified that there is at least a 10 or better vertical clearance for the strollway there under each of the bridges, which is our standard pedestrian clearance. So they have taken that in consideration to make sure they do not impede the function of the strollway.
A large topic of this conversation has been connectivity, north to south especially. 40 has created a lot of cutoffs over the years, so maintaining that as an easily accessible strollway I think is very important. We spend a lot of time talking about greenways and sidewalks, so that's an opportunity I think we really need to focus on. I also the visualization tonight was excellent. Can we get a copy of that? Is that online?
I will.
Can you get that to Tini?
I will make sure that staff has a copy of those, but they will be available online as well. I don't know that they're not available at this point in time, but they will be.
Okay.
Yeah, there's probably just to emphasize that point, a link that we could circulate to our citizens would be probably the most helpful option, because then we can include that in reports that we send out by email.
Are the noise walls a given? They have to be constructed? I mean, I'm sitting here looking at the property across from the ballpark, and I'm thinking if I had one of those things, I wouldn't mind, trying to watch a ball game from over there. But those are pretty substantial walls.
The DOT policy is we will start. We start with the public hearing and informing the public that noise walls are being studied, and that's why our staff will be at the public hearing both nights. Then we will have meetings to inform people about how noise walls are come about, the studies we do, etc. Once the preferred is selected, there is some distinct differences in the noise walls based on each alternative. We'll actually then go out and inform the individuals, both tenants and property residents, property owners, of which ones are affected. And we will have meetings to inform them of what the walls can look like, both street side, residential side, the types of materials we use, and they will then have a balloting process. If you vote, you can vote not to have a wall. Okay, it is a majority rule type of situation. So
who votes on it?
The property owners that are affected. So an example is it's a tiered system. A property owner has 2 votes. A first row property owner has 2 votes. If they live in the house, they have 2 votes, so they get 4 votes. If someone's there and is a tenant, they get 1 vote. So it's the property owner gets a vote, 2 votes, and the tenant gets a vote. It's all worked out. I'm telling you the bare basics. I may have had to get something wrong here, but our noise folks have all that clearly stated in their brochures and their pamphlets for the public to have.
And I know one thing that's been expressed about this is since we're doing the deep cut option, we're dropping a level of the roadway through, and I think we're pretty proud of our skyline and the aesthetics of Winston-Salem. So we're talking about dropping the roadway pretty significantly. So if you're going to drive through the entire length of this whole section we're talking about and have nothing but 20-foot walls above you, that's a concern.
In your packet as well, there's some visuals, 8.5 by 11 of visualizations. Those are not noise walls. Those are the actual retaining walls that will have to be put in.
Right.
And they are fairly large. They are a little more aesthetically pleasing here because the first one's a limestone stamping, the second is a brick, and then the other 2 are on-street views of what the project could look like.
I know there's been lots of impact studies done, and it seems like everyone I've heard come back is pretty much balanced between the two options. So what I'm sensing is that final decision is going to come down to council. I mean, the economic impact studies have all been, cost studies have all sort of been relatively equal.
I won't say it's splitting hairs, but it's awful close to it.
Yeah.
The alternatives, one has a plus, one has a minus. They're extremely competitive in the sense of what they offer, what they take away. So there's, as the Chamber's study with the Downtown Partnership, I think, showed from an economic standpoint, there's pluses and minuses to both, but there's not a clear winner.
Right. There's timing issues. Could affect development more quickly in one area than another. And there has been an awful lot of work put into this, and I would like to make sure that we get the benefit of that, and get all council sees the studies that have been done. That's it for now.
No, thank you. Mr. Penny, thank you very much. Very helpful presentation. I would just like to note for folks who are either watching live now or who watch the video replay in the morning, again, there are 2 public hearings next week. These will be opportunities both to ask questions and give feedback on a variety of questions associated with the Business 40 renovation project, and specifically to weigh in on the biggest hanging chad issue of, do we use the main as our main downtown entrance and exit, the Liberty main option or the Cherry Marshall option. And it is an either or. We got to do one or the other. We can't do both. So please come and give us your opinion. Come ask your questions. The 2 hearings are Tuesday, July 22nd, Milton Roads Arts Center, 251 North Spruce Street. The open house is from 4 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. and the presentation is at 7. The other is Thursday, July 24th at Miller Park Rec Center, 400 Leisure Lane. The open house is 5 to 7 p.m. The presentation is at 7:30 p.m. I'll just note that coincidentally, the second one is in my district, and I have a previous commitment to be at a cities conference out of town that night, so I will not be there. But Community Assistance Liaison Vernetta Devane will be there to take any citizen comments from my constituents and be sure I get that feedback and respond. And just for other city staff who are planning to be there, that's why I'm not there. If you get questions or comments from my constituents, please make a note of them to let me know, and I will certainly get back. Any other comments on this item? Again, Mr. Penny, thank you very much. Very helpful. And we will look forward to additional information. That brings us to G3, please.
Information on citizen request to remove sidewalk requirement.
And this is a request for the council to take an action to drop a requirement for a sidewalk on a particular block. I know it's in the West Ward. I'm glad Councilmember Clark was able to adjust your travel
I've been out of town,
schedule
but I just got back
to be here. The citizens making the request are represented here, and they will have an opportunity to comment. First, let's get an overview of the situation, please.
Good evening, council members.
Good evening.
Cedar Hills is a subdivision that was approved in 2007. Like many of our subdivisions, it's taken quite a while to build out. But the developer is to the point now that he is ready to put down the final inch of asphalt and put in the sidewalk that was on the approved plan. If you want to look at the second page in your agenda book, it does give you a feel for the scale of the subdivision. It's a fairly small subdivision off of Cedar Trail, which Cedar Trail is off of Mountain View, to give you a sense of where it's at. Staff was contacted by a property owner on Cedar Hill Court, Mr. Bradley Bennett. He was unaware of the fact that there was going to be sidewalk installed on the subdivision. And if you want to look at the third page, we've taken a few photos of his property and then of the street itself. The top photo is looking up Cedar Trail at, this is his property right here. He's got a circular driveway. And then the second photo is looking back down Cedar Trail at the same property. And then the next page is actually at the bottom of Cedar Trail looking up from, looking up Cedar Hill Court. You're standing in Cedar Trails. And then the fourth photo is showing there is sidewalk on one side of Cedar Trails and terminates there at that ramp. Because sidewalk is a street requirement for developers, staff does not have the ability to relieve that, so we inform Mr. Bennett that he would need to come discuss this issue with you.
Thank you. And just for, Mr. Bennett, you can come forward. Just, you can stand at the podium, or you can come sit at the table as you prefer. Sure, come on down. And this, Mr. Brad Bennett, yes?
Yes.
All right, so if you'll hold on just a second, let me make sure that I get from our attorney, Ms. Carmen, if the committee were to recommend to the full council that Mr. Bennett's request is well taken, all things considered, and we wanted to relieve the requirement from the developer, could we do that by simple motion, or do we have to jump through some other hearing hoop or what?
I think there might be some additional requirements, because I think the sidewalks are probably on the site plan, as I recall, so they need to do possibly a site plan and do that process, and so forth, but I can double check that.
All right. So again, that's if the committee makes that recommendation.
Right.
All right, Mr. Bennett, what would you like us to take into consideration about the situation?
Sure. So I got elected to come speak because I'm the yard that gets impacted the most. But this is an 8-home development. It's really a street. This was a long-standing home that had been in a very established neighborhood called New Sherwood, off Cedar Trail, off Mountain View, off Peace Haven. It was about 5 acres, I believe it was. The developers cut in a new street, Cedar Hills Court, put 8 lots on it on either side, 4 on either side, and then there's 3 lots that face Moyers on the backside. So there won't ever be a street connected through. And the neighbors, when we were the first to move in, we've been in there 5 years ago, 5 years last week, actually. And we've only recently gotten neighbors because of what's happened. But when we were making decisions about things we were doing with our home, landscaping, irrigation, invisible fencing for dogs, we were told that there was not, the plan for a sidewalk had been dropped. Until having contacted Mr. Turner, Robert here, I didn't know what the situation was. So we found that out now. We are very little traffic on the street, with the exception of those who live there. Cedar Trail is a widely trafficked, very trafficked street, but anybody that's up in ours is because they're supposed to be there. The street's wide enough to be safely passed, even if you are walking with the vehicular traffic. We have construction vehicles on either side at this stage, and it's still safe. So I think you've got a copy of a statement that I put together, and all the residents of the street have signed making the request. And I'm not sure if I can answer any questions for you.
All right. All right, thank you, Mr. Bennett. First, Mr. Clark.
Or any other questions?
All right, Mr. Taylor.
I do have a direct question. I see 4 signatures. Are all residents of the area included in this petition?
Yes, there is one home that is under construction, but they have not moved in yet, and I haven't had a chance to contact them. One other thing I failed to say is that because this is an established, and it's an older neighborhood of Winston-Salem, we wouldn't be a unique street without a sidewalk. In fact, the sidewalk on Cedar Trail that is coming up from where Brian's place dead ends has only been there for 6 months. Part of the sidewalk on Alastair was one of the recent additions. So we wouldn't be a sore thumb, if you will, as it relates.
Okay. Mr. Montgomery.
And 2 questions. One, the other lots, besides the one that's being constructed now, they still owned by the developer?
Yes, there are two developers in on the street. One is Sidden Homes, and they own the remaining 2 lots, but Adams Egloff Avant has built the majority of the homes in the development.
And then the staff, in terms of the proposed sidewalks, unless I'm missing something, I didn't see where those would actually fall within the area.
The proposed sidewalk is on Mr. Bennett's side of the property. There would be a 3.5-foot grass strip from the back of curb, and then the side, it would be a 5-foot sidewalk there.
And that's the only place where sidewalks would be placed?
On that one side, that's correct.
On that one side.
A question, it looks like this is designed as a true cul-de-sac, not a stub off with a eventual cut-through plan. Is that a fair reflection of its situation in the neighborhood?
It's up to the developer. The developer has an option to do a T-turnaround like that as a permanent solution. So I believe the developer just made the choice.
My understanding is that there are 3 lots that face Moyers that are still owned by the original homeowner, and that there's no plan to cut Cedar Hills Court all the way through to Moyers, which is the street that backs up. So those are 3 residential lots that would face Moyers.
Okay.
It's not a stub to continue. It's a cul-de-sac.
Do we have any engineering reason from a transportation basis to want to argue the other way that it should be, considered as a potential cut-through?
Absent a approved site plan that actually puts houses in the way of the road, it could be extended based upon what's there today, what's built today. However, if the platting of the subdivision, minor subdivision admittedly, calls for houses to be built there, then those would preclude the ability to extend the road. But physically what is there right now would accommodate an extension based upon what I'm saying so far.
Yeah. I guess, candidly, my observation has been that if something is not cut through originally, it doesn't get cut through unless there's a powerful argument from a safety access standpoint later to come back and do it.
And that's not the case here.
I don't know if it matters, but the 2 lots that are at the head of the cul-de-sac actually come together. There's not an empty lot at the top of the street.
Okay, it's not.
So there are 8 houses, 4 on either side.
Can we get that over the,
Let's see. I was considering that.
we got something you don't have. We got a picture.
I'm real familiar with it, however.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. McIntyre.
My question was, let's say somebody buys those lots that are on the Moyers side, and they want to bring that road through to develop, they think it's going to enhance their development. What would be required from a permitting standpoint to extend that road?
Yeah, just a little bit. Perfect.
Mr. Turner, can you scroll up? Okay.
I don't know if it helps to point out. So this is where Brian's place comes down. Cedar Hill comes up, Cedar Trail. This is Moyers to, this is the Sherwood 17 neighborhood that backs up. These are woods, the 3 lots, 1, 2, 3, and this is the top of the cul-de-sac. So currently, this home has been built, this is complete, this is under construction, this is empty, and this is empty.
And Mr. Turner, can you scroll it down, or scroll it so that we see below? And up a little further, please.
It continues up.
Thank you.
This is coming up Cedar Trail to Cedarwood Creek that cuts over to Surrey Path. And then Mountain View is here.
Got it.
And so, Mr. Chairman, as I was saying earlier, it isn't a situation where you'd have a strong demand to tie that together for connectivity, because you can see to the north and the south there is strong connectivity. Staff always encourages more connectivity. We don't like neighborhoods having dead ends. So it would be staff recommendation one day to connect it if possible, but I don't see there's a strong need to force it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Clark?
Can you make it, scroll it out and let me talk to the folks a bit here? First off, I would like to see the site plan to know exactly, is the sidewalk just going on one side or both sides, or what is happening?
Just one side.
One side.
So right now, the sidewalk comes down to there.
Correct.
Okay, so if we did away with that, we would still be bringing the sidewalk down here.
No, you would stop it where it is. If you did away with
We're
it,
not doing any of it?
The request is to not do any of it. And the reason is, I'll join you back up there, Cody. This right here, it's, what's it, 300 feet?
Probably, maybe a touch longer.
So, there we go. So this is an established home, and this is an empty lot. But it terminates actually right there. The pad is there. That's when we were putting it, was, what's the plan? We said, oh, well, originally we were going to put in sidewalks. Now we've decided not to. We're thinking about, actually the statement was, we're thinking about taking that money and putting it into lights. So we're like, okay, cool. And we proceeded along.
I would like, well, again, if I could get the site plan with that on it, and also I would like to see the plat here to be sure the fact there is, you're describing that these lots actually touch.
Sure.
So there's no paper street in there. Greg, if you can make it so I can show them a little bit more here. Just FYI, this sidewalk does go all the way around and meanders down all the way to where we're actually putting a trail in that a bridge will go across so we can get to Muddy Creek walkway. So that is going to be a huge addition to the neighborhood. And don't scroll this out because this gets too small, but there's a big neighborhood here. We've got part of it with the sidewalk. Long term, we would like to continue down, but I think it's Buttonwood, so that pretty much anyone in New Sherwood will have a pretty good way to get here, to get to the walkway. I think it'll be a great addition. I will say, for the record, if I could ask Ms. McCall, Mr. Turner, and Mr. Presswood if they could hang tight after this meeting, there's another sidewalk I would like to discuss. But in general, I do think sidewalks are great. There is one exception that I do make, and that is cul-de-sacs, because there's no one to walk with the 8 people there. What concerns me about this more than anything is what I am perceiving is a very arrogant attitude on the part of the builder, who told a property owner that they were not going to get a sidewalk, and who has kind of made a decision to me to spit in the city's face and say, I'm not going to put a sidewalk in, and I'm just going to go back after the fact and ask for forgiveness. And that disturbs me, and I wish the builder was here. I don't see anyone here. But I would also like to know is how could he have built this and given occupancy permits without meeting requirements? And I am reluctant to grant this to a builder who has spat in my face.
I can address that. On these items, we prefer them to hold off on putting them in until the houses are built. If they put in the sidewalk in the beginning, they get damaged by the house builders.
This gentleman has put a mailbox in the right-of-way thinking that it wasn't coming. I think that's your mailbox I saw.
Yeah, and actually we didn't put the mailbox there. It was put there for us. So, I mean, I know that when this was started, the development was probably the street. I won't even call it, it's not a development. It is 8 houses in the middle of an established neighborhood.
Yeah.
It was started in 2007.
Yeah, just when the recession hit and all that.
The first home was the one on the corner of Cedar Trail and Cedar Hills Court.
Yeah.
It sat empty for 3 years.
Yeah.
And we've been in ours for 5. So I think there was some confusion as I got into this, because when I contacted Mr. Turner's office, he says, yeah, the city does not have a plan to put in a sidewalk. What the real answer was, it's the builder's responsibility, and then the builder said, well, the city's not requiring it to be put in. Well, it wasn't the city requiring to put it in, it's these street standards. So all this got tangled up. My point is, I don't think the builder's trying to spit in anybody's face. I'm not here to defend them, but what I do know is that it's been 5 years. It is only 8 people on a cul-de-sac, and I sit here with my homeowner hat on, but knowing sidewalks are extremely important.
Yeah. And it's not just you. Greg, can you make it so we can see up close.
Don't get technical with us.
Someone has allowed you to landscape, someone has put a mailbox, and the house right at the corner has also landscaped in the right-of-way. And I'm appalled by it. Now, having said that, I think this is a legitimate place where we don't need a sidewalk, because it's only 8 people, you're right. The only person that's going to walk up that street lives there. And you're talking about very, very little traffic. But I'm just concerned that a builder, or whoever, either ignorantly or deliberately did not do what the law requires, and this just accepts us to forgive it after the fact. I struggle with that, and I don't think it's unintentional, because there's bushes and everything, and that's the problem with installing sidewalks after the fact, and the reason I've asked these people to stay late. There's another sidewalk we're trying to put in that's 30 years after the houses were built, but you got mailboxes and bushes and trees and everything in the right-of-way, and then it is very difficult to do it. The time to put in the sidewalks, or at least the plan to put them in, is when you're in the planning stage, and then you don't put the mailbox in it, and things of that sort. So I would ask that it be stay in committee. I would like to see the site plan. I would like to see some things, and I would like for the builder to be here and to explain to me why he ignored the law, or the site, or the whatever it is. But when we approved this, it had a sidewalk on it, and I need to hear from them on that. And I don't know who the builder is. Is it Avant?
These 2 homes on this site were built by Trent Adams.
But the developer of the...
Or who's
It's a joint developer. It's Sidden Homes and Adams Eckloff Avant are the 2 developers of the street.
Okay. Mr. Gregory?
Yeah, question. If in fact the requirement for the sidewalk at some point was waived, is there any way that we can require or request, but more so require, the investment of the money that would be spent on the sidewalks into aesthetics within the neighborhood, such as lighting and things like that, to at least still get an investment into the neighborhood? I don't know if the neighbors would want something like that, but to a point in terms of that was something that was going to be invested in the neighborhood, to still get an investment of some sort of some type of aesthetic or something in there.
I'll look at that. As I mentioned before, it sounds like we probably, when the developer will have to petition for a site plan amendment, perhaps in that discussion. You can say that would be something that might be beneficial to the council considering an amendment, but I'll look at it.
For example, running sidewalk further down Cedar Trail, let me get up one more. If you don't give me one here, maybe give me some here. And I don't know, this may be on the plan. I don't know how much land in there, but something like that might be.
It's not in the current round.
Anyway, I would ask that they stay in committee, and I would like, and I'll be happy to meet with the developers at an off-site meeting or whatever, but, you know, they have created the very problem we tried to get around, and that is having to put sidewalks in after things have been landscaped. Having said that, I do think your request is very legitimate. If there's any place not to put it, as I said, it's a cul-de-sac where only 4 or 5 people at a time might be using it. Anyway.
Mr. McIntosh?
My question, I'm trying to ask it earlier, but I don't think I did a good job. If that street, if somebody does want to run that street all the way through, that's going to be a public process, right? They're going to have to come petition for that, so then this neighborhood will have an input on whether or not that gets open. I mean, it'll...
Unless the developer bought it up and decided themselves to run it through, but yes, anything else would be a public process.
Okay. And then I just talked to the connectivity side of it. There are 2 neighborhoods in the Northwest Ward that both are talking to me about doing away with their internal sidewalks and then using that money to use on the outside of the neighborhood so that they can then connect to a larger greenway process. So, I mean, I understand that the connectivity needs to be done, but I think it's, if the neighborhood doesn't want it and they feel like the roads are wide enough and it's safe, I don't think we should force sidewalks on them.
Right.
These are older established neighborhoods.
Any objection to holding this in committee and giving the opportunity for Mr. Clark to meet with the developer and have further conversation about how to address this?
No objection.
If not, then we'll do that. And does it make more sense to bring this back in August or September?
I don't see any reason why it couldn't come back in August, but based upon the things that we anticipate for your August calendar, it might make more sense for September.
Let's think September. Ms. Montgomery?
I don't know, Councilmember Clark would, but if it gets to a place where if it has to go through those other pieces, then I think that may dictate what we actually have to do.
Yeah, if we have to have a site plan amendment and all that.
Yeah, I get the sense that this is on hold pending what we do here. So it's less urgent than if we had an external deadline ticking.
I'm fine with it being on hold.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We don't do anything quick.
That's fine with me.
Nothing happens contrary to your desire at this point, as long as it's on hold. So.
I guess the only thing, I don't know, is it a letter of credit or is it a performance bond? What do we hold?
We have a $16,000 performance bond.
Well, given how this developed, I don't think we're falling all over ourselves worrying
I
about
just want to make sure we're not up against an expiration period and have to look at calling on it, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, so unless there turns out to be some special complication in doing that, we'll bring this back in September. All right. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Certainly, Mr. Bennett, good to see you. Thank you. Other matters that need to be discussed by Public Works this evening?
No.
Mr. Turner saying no. Hearing none, then we will stand adjourned. Thank you very much.